survivors! We believe survivors!
We believe survivors, they're chanting. That was Senator Ted Cruz and his wife Heidi being forced out of a Washington restaurant by left-wing activists. I guess they're talking about the sexual assault accusations against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. The Texas senator endorsed Kavanaugh for the highest court back in July. Let's talk about this with our experts. I mean, this now happens. We've seen it with the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. There have been other incidents with Sarah Sanders, Stephen Miller, et cetera.
Yeah, I think most people look at that and say that's awful. I mean, you look at the polls going into the midterms and you kind of wonder how Republicans are doing so well in spite of everything. It's stuff like that. The protests that have been happening in Capitol, how many people have been arrested in the last 6 months? Hundreds and hundreds. Most reasonable people, even if you don't like Republicans right now, are not down with those kind of tactics. And so if Democrats want to do well going ahead, you've got to find a way to draw a line, because reasonable people will never get on board with a movement that does things like that.
What do you think? I mean, there are a lot of, I can't speak for these activists, but I think a lot of them would say what the Trump administration is doing, what Republicans are doing is intolerable, and this is civil disobedience.
Right. Well, I mean, I think there's a difference between just protesting and then this kind of stuff. And so I would just ask them, what do they hope to accomplish with it? So, okay, they feel that way, that's legitimate, and they want to do something to change things. I don't see how this helps them change anything. I think it actually makes somebody who almost never seems sympathetic, Ted Cruz. Seems sympathetic, because it just isn't. And it's also, you have to think about the other people. This is a fancy restaurant who are there trying to have a meal, and you're disrupting people. So I think, I don't know, you could protest him as he leaves, right? I mean, it's like, there's other things you could do rather than actually making it impossible for the person to.
But there are many levels of the movement. I certainly wouldn't do that. I don't support Ted Cruz, but when I see my far left Democratic brothers and sisters engaged, that's their choice of engagement. And as a moderate Democrat, as a business Democrat, I feel the way they feel. We just express it differently. And so while I don't condone it per se, this leadership in the White House, the GOP, and all the changes going on in this country merit protest. And how they protest, who they protest, is up to them, because they got a First Amendment right to do it, like all of us in this country.
I want to bring in a quote from Brian Fallon, the Democratic activist who is running the campaign against Judge Kavanaugh, because you alluded to it earlier. It was in the New York Times, and he says, quote, "Democrats would have the leverage after the midterms to force Trump to choose a moderate caretaker-style nominee, or else could keep the seat open entirely for 2 more years." The strategy being delay this vote until the midterms. Hopefully Democrats retake the House and Senate, in his view, and then we can either get a less conservative nominee, or maybe even just keep the seat open. You reacted to that on Twitter. I wanted to give you a chance here to do it as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is where the conservative base is absolutely apoplectic. And it's not just Brian Fallon. We've had Senator Hirono on your program and others discuss a very similar strategy, which basically it all comes back to retribution for what they see as a poor handling of Merrick Garland, right? And that's fine.
Again? Merrick Garland.
Yeah, exactly. The fact that you're bringing it up, I think, underscores the point, right? We have now accused, as a Judiciary Committee, is going to be dealing with the accusation of sexual assault against the nominee, which is a very extremely serious thing to have at this level in politics. And to just sort of brush it aside as, well, Merrick Garland.
That's not what he was doing.
No, that's not exactly what doing. That's what McConnell's doing.
Yeah, somebody.
But I think,
totally.
I think it's a fair thing to complain about that story, and I don't think that was helpful. I don't quite know why Brian Fallon did that, because it sounded like, I know this is not what Brian meant, but it sounded like, oh, we found some people and they made this accusation, and we're now gonna, we have this big plot that we're carrying out. When in fact it's more, I think what he was saying is they're taking advantage of an opportunity, which is now it looks like Kavanaugh's seat could be in jeopardy, and of course they're trying to figure out how they can try to get the seat back that they feel was stolen from them.
And Scott, let me show you some numbers, because I want you to take a look at this Gallup poll. 45% of Americans say they have a favorable view of the Republican Party. Democrats at 44%. That's the highest favorable view for the Republican Party since 2011. President Trump's poll numbers have been underwater, to say it nicely. What do you see going on here? Do you think this is a reaction to the protesters, a reaction to Democratic strategy? What do you think it is?
No, I think that's a snapshot in time. The Democrats have stayed at 44%. The Republicans in that poll have gone up by 9%. When the poll was taken, you've got the Kavanaugh nomination, which is very, very important to the GOP. The GOP, surprisingly, 81% support this president. But the Kavanaugh nomination will give them control of the Supreme Court for a generation, and that's hugely important, not just to the evangelicals, but to several Republicans. I think that poll reflects that.
Do you agree? I mean, you're a Republican, but you've had a lot of issues with President Trump.
Yeah, well, I'm shocked Democrats aren't doing better. To me, I think they have a lot of enthusiasm. They have a lot of issues that I think would do well for them in the midterms. I mean, we think about everything, family detention issues, Black Lives Matter, Parkland. And yet, the National Party hasn't been able to channel that or focus that in any way. And the Democratic Party writ large seems very reactionary. And I don't see any leaders popping forward with a positive, compelling, alternative message. And that's, I think, why we're hung up.
We're competing in Georgia and Florida. Those are
Sure.
deep red states.
Yep.
That's a manifest evidence.
And that's a national poll,
that Democrats are coming together. You know, every race is different at the state level, and so but when you get a numbers like what we see, when you get numbers in Georgia and Florida where you have a woman candidate, African American male candidate, and they're competing and have a shot, that's important.